The base Neo format wasn't all about Pichus and Sneasels and Steelix. It was also a resurgence of some classic base set era decks with some new tools. Fire type decks in particular came back strong because their biggest competition in Feraligatr had been severely downplayed by the reintroduction of energy removal as well as the new Neo Parasect. Fire type decks now had a version of energy acceleration in Typhlosion, and if powered up, could one-shot one of the tankiest Pokemon in the format, Steelix. In the Rocket On format, this Typhlosion paired incredibly well with Blaine's Arcanine. I've got a video up if you're interested in that. But which base set era deck could really use the support from this Typhlosion? Well, you've already seen the thumbnail and the title of this video, so you know that it is Fossil Moltres' Wildfire. This is Wildfire revisited for base Neo. Let's get at it. Cleffa, because it's Cleffa. You're going to need that time to set up the Typhlosions on your bench. You want to get at least one. Getting more than one is ideal. That way you're able to flip multiple coin per turn. And to pull that off, you're going to need a couple turns of Eek at least. Now, Blaine's Charmander is an amazing card. It was completely overlooked during its debut in the gym sets, but it really shines in base Neo because there's such a huge emphasis on discarding energy. You can use that Kindle attack over and over again for the first 10 turns of the game, and you're going to be able to discard a lot of your opponent's very valuable energy. You have to remember, in base Neo, most decks only ran 12 energy cards, and those were typically special energy that the deck was relying on. So if you're discarding those every single turn, then that's really going to put your opponent in a bad spot, while at the same time putting yourself in an ideal situation because Kindle's also discarding an energy off of Blaine's Charmander. That's going to give you a plenty of fire energy in your discard that you can get back out of there using Typhlosion's Pokemon power. Running a 3-2-3 line of Typhlosion in this deck, going with the Cyndaquil and the Quilava that have a little more HP, that can make a huge difference, especially if you don't have a focus band on there yet. And you are going to want to save your focus bands for your Blaine's Charmanders and your Moltres. During some key matchups, like against Steelix, you may want to go ahead and use those focus bands for Typhlosion and just use it as a primary attacker using Flame Burst, because that's going to get you a win much faster. However, typically what you're going to be doing is focusing on Blaine's Charmander and Moltres for the core concept of this deck, which is to deprive your opponent of energy cards, forcing them to dig through their deck for cards to either replenish those energy or retrieve them and shuffle them back into the deck. While doing so, your opponent is going to be milling through their own deck, and then you're going to pull out a Moltres, which is hopefully loaded up with fire energy, and use Wildfire to further cripple their deck and shorten the game a little bit so that they deck out. 4 copies of Pokemon Tower as the stadium in this deck. It's going to be a super important card. Not only does it stop various ways of your opponent getting energy back into their hand, energy retrieval and super energy retrieval weren't widely used, but you did see them every now and then. But it's also going to stop your opponent from using Eco Gem. If they lay down an Eco Gem, you can just replace it easily with your own Pokemon Tower. You should be able to have one in hand because there's 4 in this deck. And that's really going to let you wreak havoc on your opponent's energy cards. 3 copies of Computer Search, because not only is it a great utility card, letting you get those key cards that you need in those moments, like a Pokemon Tower if you don't have one in hand, but it's also giving you a way to discard more fire energy from your hand and use Typhlosion's ability to get those straight out of discard and onto a Moltres. Just 2 Professor Elms, no Oak in this deck, because you are wanting the number of cards in your deck to outlast your opponent, so only shuffling and refreshing your hand. 2 copies of Breeder just to get into those Typhlosions a little bit faster if you can get that set up early on. If you can search it out fast enough with a computer search before your opponent plays a last and gets shuffled back in. Energy removal, it's going to be another key card in this deck, because what will happen is your opponent will catch on that you're going to keep discarding whatever energy they put on their active Pokemon with Blaine's Charmander. So they'll start trying to load up stuff on their bench to just switch in and knock out Charmander. That's when you're going to start playing these energy removals and super energy removals. You can really get by playing super energy removal, because if you've got a Typhlosion on your bench, you can flip that coin, and if you hit heads, you're getting an extra energy laid down that turn from your discard. So that's basically a free use of a super energy removal to take 2 off of whatever your opponent's trying to load up. Much like Breeder, the danger here is that you're going to be holding them in your hand waiting for those energy cards to get laid down so you can discard them. And what may happen is your opponent gets a last off on you, and those all get shuffled back into your hand. That's when top decking a Professor Elm can be really helpful. That way you're not getting stranded as well. 4 copies of Focus Band, those are going to be going on your Charmanders and on your Moltres, since those are the core Pokemon cards in this deck. Those are going to be your key attackers. Typhlosion's more of just a support for this particular deck, unless you get in situations where you can win if your opponent has a fire weakness maybe. You'll notice this build is actually looking a lot more like a base set era build and not a base Neo build. For one, there's a lot more energy, lots and lots of energy, and not very many trainers. The Pokemon and the energy count is staying pretty high, staying pretty true to the original Wildfire build, which is also on the channel. If you're interested, go check that out in the base era playlist. This is really just an updated version that incorporates all the brand new tools that were introduced after Fossil, basically. This build will be running 20 energy cards in total, so you're definitely going to be able to outlast any other base Neo deck if it comes down to a war of discarding energy. And the majority of the format is not ready for this type of deck. The metagame was prepared for fast, hard-hitting decks like Sneasel, but also wall and stall decks like Steelix and Chansey, but not for a mill deck. Which is why I had a lot of fun playtesting this deck against Metal Chansey, because you're going to be discarding those double colorless and those metal energy faster than Chansey can lay them down, meaning that it's not going to be dealing damage with double edge, and you're completely circumventing the point of Metal Chansey by discarding the energy and relying on Moltres to mill through their deck. The biggest issue really comes with Energy Charge, which Chansey and almost every other deck in this format ran because they were reliant on those special energy cards. Pokemon Tower does not stop Energy Charge because it's going back into their deck, so it's not only getting those energy cards back into their deck, but it's also making it harder to mill them out because they're adding 2 cards from their discard back in there. This really becomes more of a stall tactic for your opponent, because as long as you're discarding energy cards faster than they can lay them down, then there's no problem with Energy Charge at all. There's not a Pokemon you're going to come up against that's going to knock out a Charmander or a Moltres with just 1 energy card. Between Blaine's Charmander's Kindle attack and the 8 energy removal cards you have in this deck, it should be no problem at all keeping your opponent completely deprived of energy cards, whether it's on their active or their bench. However, there is one old enemy of the fire type that did make a bit of a resurgence in base Neo as well. Rain dancing its way back onto the scene was base set Blastoise, and the base Neo version of this deck ran only Cleffa and a 4-3-4 line of Blastoise, because with the help of Cleffa, you could get set up fast enough for Blastoise to wreak havoc on its own. Rain Dance no longer needed support from big basics. Those were a thing of the past. Now you could rely on a Stage 2 evolution card. And that's one of the reasons I love this format so much, is players looked at the prominence of Steelix and Sneasel and said, hey, why don't we start using these high HP fire types, because there's not really a good check for them in the format right now. And these Stage 2 fire type playstyles can actually compete really well. And so you kind of saw this wellspring of fire types again. And because of that, you then saw some niche decks pop up like Rain Dance. Blastoise was back. And within the base Neo format, you suddenly had 3 Feraligatr decks to deal with. Each one viable in its own way, each with its own unique playstyle. And so as we get into more of these tier 2 decks for base Neo, keep in mind that their viability and playability completely depended on the area in which you were playing. At what point in the metagame cycle were you introducing this deck to your local TCG scene? The diversity of decks and just the sheer depth of the card pool that you could build from really made this format something special. As I hope you'll see by the time I finish this base Neo playlist, I really think it's going to have more decks than any other format that I'll feature on this channel. Speaking of which, let me know down in the comments what decks you would like to see next. I'm working my way through the list, which keeps getting longer and longer with each video I post. It's absolutely fantastic. You guys have so many great ideas. And just know that I will get to your request decks as soon as I reach them on the list. Check out the Drunk Shuckle Instagram. for a little extra Pokemon stuff, a little sneak peeks onto what videos are coming up. So until next video, bye.